Good evening and welcome to 16 by 9, The Bigger Picture. If you've ever read a bedtime story to your child, you're probably familiar with the titles Love You Forever and The Paper Bag Princess. The name Robert Munsch should be no stranger to you either. But life hasn't been all gumdrops and lollipops for this internationally acclaimed kids author. Tonight in a 16 by 9 exclusive, we open the book to the life of Robert Munsch. And you may be surprised what we reveal about the man who's enchanted so many of us. Here's our Daryl Kaninen-Belt.
It's the hottest ticket around for these fans.
The Wiggle.
The kind of audience usually reserved for rock stars. And to children, he is a rock star. A Canadian icon.
Stephanie's Ponytail by Robert Munsch.
Recently honored on Canada's Walk of Fame and already a member of the Order of Canada. He is best-selling children's author Robert Munsch and is just resurfacing from a self-imposed exile as he struggles with the effects of a stroke suffered in 2008.
There you go, man. Thank you.
Our exclusive interview with Munsch reveals his long battle to recover, not only from his stroke, but also from the personal demons that have haunted him most of his life.
This is your first big performance.
First big performance, yes.
How do you feel?
Okay.
What does that mean?
Well, I'm a little nervous, but I think it'll go. It'll go.
Hands together for Robert Munsch.
He has been called Canada's King of Kid Lit. Over the past 25 years, his books have sold more than 40 million copies. A master of storytelling, turning generations of children into readers. His books, such as Love You Forever, The Paper Bag Princess, and Mortimer, have become a staple at the bedside of millions of kids. All this came to a stop when Munsch, attending an uncle's funeral in Pittsburgh, woke up and couldn't speak.
I could walk, I could do everything. I couldn't talk. That was just out to lunch. It was, those wires got pulled.
When did you actually know that you had a stroke?
I came home and my wife was saying, "What's the matter?" And my daughter came in and she listened to what was happening and said, "Hospital, get him to the hospital right now. This is serious." And they took me to the hospital and did an MRI, and that showed a clot in the center of my brain.
A clot?
Yeah.
That's scary stuff.
There's not really that much you can do about it. You have to wait around and see. And I started talking and single words, and then it was like a baby. Single words and...
So you're actually trying to search for words to finish your sentences?
I'll get in the middle of a sentence and I'll forget what's coming next. Like you don't forget what's coming next in your sentences, you just say them.
Mother and father, they
Did it happen today?
Yeah, it happened today with, twice with, what's the story? The birthday story, the one I start off with. I lost my way in it a couple times and would flub around, then I would get it back again.
I remember that. I remember you went, oh.
Then.
So what are you thinking about at that point? What's going through your mind at that
I'm
point?
just trying to, this is stupid, it's my story and I don't know what comes next. I was worried I wouldn't be able to do it again. I just said, well, maybe I just won't tell stories anymore.
Stories that have been part of his childhood. Born June 11th, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to Margaret and Thomas Munsch. Robert was the fourth of 9 children in a middle-class Catholic family.
Our house, strangely enough, was the place that kids came to play in the neighborhood.
But despite what seemed a happy upbringing, Robert was aware at an early age that he was different. And as a young boy in grade 5, he had a revelation.
I remember saying to myself, looking in the mirror, in the bathroom mirror, saying to myself when I was a kid, I'm not happy. I want to remember that I'm not happy. Everybody says that kids are happy, but I'm not happy. And that got worse and worse as I grew up.
Munsch told his parents about his thoughts, but in the 1950s, the awareness of mental illness just wasn't there.
Looking back on it, they knew there was something wrong and they didn't know what to do with me.
So how did you cope?
I decided that feelings didn't matter because my feelings didn't relate. Like if I was feeling suicidal that day, that was just me. If I was feeling happy that day, that was just me too. So I started to ignore my feelings.
Robert was battling a mental illness that he didn't understand, and that made him feel completely out of sync with the outside world.
With 9 kids, it's easy to disappear. Like, I disappeared. I was a good kid. I didn't cause trouble. I didn't get arrested. I didn't steal cars. I was a problem in school, but by high school, I had learned how to function in school, which is why it made sense that I went off to be a priest, because priests control their emotions, and I fit right in.
Thinking the priesthood would instill the control and structure he needed, for 7 years, Robert turned his life over to a higher authority. But even the Jesuits knew something wasn't right with him.
Near the end of it, they suggested I go see a shrink, because it was like, you don't know it, but you got troubles. I remember the guy I went to see about leaving suggested I see a shrink, but then I was mugged. I was mugged on the way home walking home from the subway in Boston. Somebody hit me from behind and broke my eye orbit, and this side of my face is all plastic surgery. And
Really?
I didn't go see a shrink. I went crazy and carried a knife and prowled the Boston subways for a year, thinking I would recognize the person who had mugged me, but I hadn't seen anybody. I was just a crazy person waiting to,
The incident plunged Robert into one of the darkest periods of his life. He says that he entered a manic state as he searched for his attacker, ready to kill.
I was a threat to anybody. I didn't talk about it, but I was looking for the person that had done this to me. I'm just happy I didn't do something.
Did you tell anyone about this?
No. I carried the knife in my back pocket.
That's very close.
Well, you have to get it, Having somebody try to kill you messes up your mind.
Yes.
Still to come on 16 by 9.
I'm an addict. I had a drinking problem. I had a cocaine problem.
That's all coming up. Welcome back to 16 by 9, the bigger picture.
While Robert Munsch was filling the pages of his books with stories from his wild imagination, there was a dark side to this acclaimed author that he desperately hid. We continue now with Growing Up Munsch.
At 24, after surviving a brutal attack and narrowly escaping death, Munsch, for the first time, tried to make things right. He walked away from the priesthood.
It helped me decide to go into daycare because I decided I should be dead. I'll just do what I want to do because I don't owe anything anybody. I'm alive and I want to work with kids, and it doesn't make any sense that I'm going to do it.
His salvation lied inside the imagination of the children and the stories that would eventually make him famous.
Well, I was wondering for my first story.
Telling stories and performing for kids has always been what Munsch does best. And his unique ability to tell a story slowly moved Munsch from the darkness into light. And he found his true calling.
It was a low-paying job, and I just decided, the hell with it, I'm going to do it. And I did.
Pursuing his new career opened the door to the love of his life, Ann Beeler, the paramedic working at a daycare in Boston in the early 70s.
It was his rapport with the children that I found first attractive. And then I discovered he was smart, too.
In 1973, Ann and Robert got married and decided to head north. Canada to them seemed like a good adventure and a good place to start a family. Settling in Guelph, Ontario, and working at the university ultimately led them to the life they know now, life at the top of Canadian Kid Lit.
He told stories to kids because he's always kind of looked at things from a kid's point of view, and that was the place the stories came from. So to be able to have the option of maybe getting paid a little bit of money to do something that he really enjoyed doing, that was gravy. You don't go into daycare expecting to ever be wildly successful.
While the move and change of career gave him at least a little sense of belonging, Robert Munsch continued to battle his mental demons. In fact, all of the books he's written, and he's written 54 of them, he likens himself to Bridget in purple, green, and yellow.
When most people read the story, it's a funny story about a kid who colors herself. Duh, period. But for me, it's how do you deal with life when you have to make yourself appear human to walk out the door.
And for you, really, a lot of your life
Was coloring myself. Not feeling right. Something was wrong.
So much so that in 1976, Robert began searching for solace in a place that is familiar to so many literary giants and artists.
I found that drinking would break my depression in a minute. I could take a drink and wait and, I feel okay.
For 4 years, Robert Munsch secretly drank, unknown to his wife, his friends, and his co-workers. And during that same time, he and his wife suffered unbearable tragedies.
Before we had children, I was pregnant twice, and in both cases the baby died, which was a profound experience for both of us, and difficult.
There was a mother who had a new baby, and she picked it up and rocked it back and forth,
I should have gone and seen a shrink then, but I didn't. I toughed it out and went back to having mood swings and dealing with it. And that continued right up through when we had kids, when the babies died.
It was a pivotal time. Anne was coping with the devastating loss of 2 stillborn babies, and she insisted that Robert seek professional help.
Without Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't know what I would have done. First, Alcoholics Anonymous demands that to come in, you say you have a problem.
Sober for the first time in 4 years, Robert and Anne discussed adopting children, which eventually led to Julie, Andrew, and Taya joining the Munsch family. Robert also tried his hand at writing.
It was kind of therapy. A guy we're talking to said, well, write what would have happened if the kid had grown up. That's a way of saying goodbye to it. So that's actually why I wrote it.
Published in 1986, Love You Forever resonated with readers, young and old alike, eventually catapulting Robert Munsch to the New York Times bestsellers list, selling more than 20 million copies worldwide. But as his legacy was going to print, Munsch would have the first of many drinking relapses throughout his life.
Started thinking maybe I could tolerate a little bit of wine, and when was that? 86. And I took a drink and ended up with a drinking problem again. And my family, my son saw it fresh. He says, this is bullshit, you have a drinking problem.
How bad was it? Would you get up, brush your teeth, and then drink?
I didn't brush my teeth. I would have the glass of scotch first thing in the morning, and I would be a wreck if I didn't have that glass of scotch.
So would you put on your robe, go downstairs and have that the first thing?
Yes. And my wife didn't know that. Some days I would just quietly drink all day. Other days I would be doing writing and I wouldn't drink.
So what are the parameters of your work schedule then?
I discovered I couldn't tell stories when I was drinking. I couldn't do shows when I was drinking. I couldn't write when I was drinking. So the discipline of writing kept my drinking to the edges of my life.
The paradox of Robert's double life is reflected in his zany characters and stories. His books tell funny stories that tackle subjects that aren't funny at all.
The switch between my public person and my public person was so crazy, and my private person was so depressed and unhappy. As an alcoholic, I was unhappy about all sorts of things that were actually the alcohol.
And it wasn't just alcohol that Robert Munsch used to dull the pain. Just 5 years ago, at the age of 58, he says he started using cocaine.
When I was drinking, I would sometimes drink too much and do stupid things. And one of the stupid things I did was use cocaine. And like alcohol is a downer, cocaine is an upper. They go well together. But it was clear I was just falling apart and had to do something.
And doing something meant going back to Alcoholics Anonymous and joining Narcotics Anonymous. In the midst of all of this, by 1990, Munsch was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, the mental illness that has afflicted him for much of his life.
I know other people who have bipolar and have problems with alcohol and cocaine. They're called dual addicted, like dual diagnosis. It's a particular thing because you have to keep the bipolar stuff just under control, or your whole life you'll go into moods, then you'll use drugs, then you'll get worse, then it's a mess.
Still to come on 16 by 9.
He mentioned to us that he has been clean for 119 days. Do you believe that?
I do, and it hurts to hear it.
That's all coming up. We're back with the bigger picture.
He's entertained and enchanted our kids for a generation. But what about his own children growing up Munsch? For the first time, we hear from the people in his life. Here's our Daryl Cananenbelt.
The year 2008 would be a tumultuous year for the Munsch family. Their famous father, a man whose name was synonymous with children and innocence, was about to drop a bombshell that he was a drug addict.
It was funny. I did it at Christmas dinner. and one of my daughter, her response was, "You can't go to NA, they're a bunch of addicts." I said, well, that's the point.
Some say this is a nervous laugh. But for the three Munsch children, the news was a shock. Andrew Munsch didn't want to speak to us for this story, but Julie and Taya, the oldest and youngest of the Munsch kids, remember the impact.
Do you worry about parents watching this
Yeah.
and saying, how are those parents going to perceive my father now?
There is always going to be some worry. I think my biggest concern is that this career of my father's is his, lifelong love. Like this is what he does and loves and needs. This has been his therapy, and without this, then I would be, sincerely concerned about where he would be at on an emotional level.
It was shocking, but it was just one more thing. It's just one more thing with the family, and you just deal with it. I'm glad that you realize that something's wrong and that you're going to fix it.
But for Anne, Munsch outing himself by going public for the first time on 16 by 9 is a big concern.
It can be a little bit scary thinking that the world knows a lot more about you than you know about the world. And I think that's what can be uncomfortable about having things about our families turn up on national television.
But the family believes their struggles can best be related to one of Munsch's more controversial books, Good Families Don't. It's about a little girl named Carmen who tries to battle a taboo subject, and her parents don't believe her.
Good families like ours do not have farts. What would the neighbors say?
And Munsch says her husband is like the kid in the book.
It's about families who have a problem. They have this problem in their house. And nobody wants to admit that it's there. But they can't deal with it until they admit that it's there. And then the kid in the family solves the problem. I think Bob is very often the kid in a situation. He's willing to name the thing to see clearly what's happening here. And that's very appealing in a world where many of us are busy thinking, gee, would it be polite to say something? He's not wondering about that. He just says, somebody should do something here, I'll do it.
Julie sees the consequences of her father's confession.
Cocaine, that's pretty big.
It is pretty big.
That's illegal.
It is illegal. You know, it was a shock. You know, you have this image of what someone who does cocaine is. It certainly wasn't my father. And an idea of, you know, how is he getting it? What's he doing? That type of thing. That was, I think, one of the bigger worries is about his personal safety.
And after 37 years of marriage, Anne supports her husband no matter what.
Most families recognize the problem way before the person who has the problem. And the families struggle with all kinds of mistakes the person makes and things they do because they've been drinking and personality changes and all kinds of stuff. I didn't have to deal with those things because Bob figured it out and decided what he was going to do about it.
At the time of this interview, Munsch says he has been clean for 119 days.
I go to a meeting almost every day. My support group is mostly people in Narcotics Anonymous who can empathize with, hey, this is what we do, and it's hard, and staying sober is hard to do.
And Munsch is taking it one day at a time, and therapy and medication helps.
Therapy helped me deal with to have emotions again, that emotions are okay, that emotions are good, that I'm taking pills now, and if I'm unhappy about something, I'm really unhappy. It's not an artifact of my brain.
And just like his books, his life is playing out in his head. What does the future hold? With a filing cabinet filled with dozens of new children's stories, we can confidently say, Munsch more.
I do not plan my stories. My stories happen while I'm storytelling. I've never had any luck sitting down and saying, what should I write next? And my editor says, this would work, and I'll try it. It doesn't, I don't do it that way. See, I can look at life now and I say, life is okay. Life is okay, it's worth the risk, and it's good.